I was added to a group chat where everyone joked about me, and they forgot I could see the messages. The notification sound was familiar, that cheerful ping my phone made whenever someone added me to a group chat. I was sitting in my apartment, halfway through a beer, watching highlights from last night's game. It was Wednesday evening, nothing special. I glanced at my phone and saw I'd been added to something called The Real Talk. 15 people. Most of them were guys I'd known since college, plus a few from work. I smiled, thinking it was probably someone organizing another poker night or fantasy league. I opened it. The first message I saw made my stomach drop. Finally, we can talk without St. Nathan seeing everything. My name is Nathan, and I'd been friends with these people for 8 years. I stared at that message, posted 3 minutes before I was added. My finger hovered over the screen, frozen. Then another message appeared. Dude, did you add him? Check the members list. A pause. Then, oh shit, remove him. But nobody did, and I kept reading. Message after message loaded as I scrolled up, and each one felt like a punch I wasn't ready for. They were talking about me. All of them. Not arguing about whether I was annoying. They all agreed I was. They were comparing notes on how exhausting I was to be around, how they'd been taking turns making excuses to avoid hanging out with me one-on-one. Someone had created a scoring system for who had to deal with Nathan each week. Another had shared a screenshot of a text I'd sent about my mom's surgery, with the caption, "Here we go again with the drama." I couldn't breathe right. My hands started shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. These were my best friends, the people I'd helped move apartments, celebrated promotions with, stood up for at weddings. And they had a secret chat dedicated to how much they couldn't stand me. I took a screenshot of everything before anyone could delete it. My military training kicked in, document first, process later. I'd served 4 years in the Marines before college, and one thing they drilled into us was securing evidence. My hands steadied as I methodically captured every message, every cruel joke, every casual dismissal of things I'd shared with them in confidence. There were hundreds of messages dating back 18 months. 18 months of friendship I thought was real, while behind my back, they were crafting this alternate narrative where I was the punchline. One message showed a photo I'd posted of my dog Cooper, who'd just recovered from surgery. The caption read, "How much do we bet this is the only living thing that can tolerate Nathan?" 32 laugh reacts. 32 people who'd commented, "So glad Cooper's okay," on my actual post, while here they mocked the fact that I cared. I didn't respond in the chat. I didn't text anyone privately. I just sat there as my phone kept buzzing with panicked messages. "Nathan, this isn't what it looks like. Bro, it was just venting. Everyone does it. You're taking this out of context." Each excuse made it worse, because they weren't apologizing for what they'd said. They were apologizing for getting caught. The chat had gone silent now, probably moved to yet another secret group where they could coordinate their damage control. I finished my beer in one long swallow, then opened my laptop. If they thought this was just going to blow over, they didn't know me at all, which, apparently, they didn't. They knew some performance version of me they'd created in their heads. This annoying caricature they'd all agreed was real. They didn't know the person who'd learned to document everything, to build airtight cases, to never make a move without a strategy. The Marine Corps taught me that. And right now, sitting in my apartment with my dog at my feet and my phone full of evidence, I started planning. The first thing I did was create a folder on my desktop labeled Documentation and uploaded all the screenshots. Then I went through my own message history with each person in that group. I wanted to see if I'd missed signs, if there were patterns I'd been too trusting to notice. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. All those times plans had fallen through at the last minute. They'd happened right after someone posted in the secret chat about being stuck with Nathan duty. My birthday dinner last year that got rescheduled 3 times before finally happening with half the people missing. There was a whole thread about how to get out of it without seeming like assholes. The weekend camping trip where everyone suddenly had work emergencies. They'd gone. Without me. I found photos posted in the group chat of them at the exact campsite we'd supposedly canceled. They'd taken a group photo, all 15 of them grinning at the camera, and someone had written, "Best trip ever. Guess what made the difference?" I sat back in my chair, feeling something cold settle in my chest. This wasn't casual complaining. This was coordinated exclusion. I needed to understand the scope. Who was in on this? I started making a list. There was David, my college roommate who I'd considered my closest friend. He was the one who'd created the scoring system. Jeremy from work, who I'd recommended for a promotion that got him a 20% raise. He'd shared the screenshot of my mom's surgery text. Allison, who I'd helped through her divorce, letting her stay in my guest room for 2 months. She'd posted, "I feel guilty sometimes, but then he starts talking, and I remember why we do this." The list went on. 15 people total, and as I cross-referenced with my main friend group, I realized this was everyone. Everyone I'd considered close. My entire social circle had a secret chat about how much they hated dealing with me, and I'd had no idea. The worst part wasn't even the mockery, it was the performance. Every smile, every "good to see you, man," every "we should hang out more," had been a lie. They were actors, and I was the only one who didn't know it was a show. By midnight, I had everything organized chronologically. I could see how the chat had evolved from occasional venting to something darker. The early messages were almost understandable. Everyone complains about their friends sometimes. But around the 6-month mark, it had shifted. Someone had suggested they start declining my invitations in rotation so I wouldn't notice the pattern. Someone else had created a shared document of Nathan stories, embarrassing moments they'd witnessed or things I'd told them in confidence, all written up like comedy sketches for the others to read. There was even a poll about whether they should stage an intervention or just slowly ghost me. The vote was close, but ghosting won. I found a thread from 3 months ago where they debated removing me from the main group chat entirely, but decided it would be too obvious, and they'd wait for him to do something that justified it. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I went deeper. I looked up information about workplace harassment, hostile social environments, and defamation. I wasn't sure if any of this qualified legally, but I wanted to know my options. What I learned was that while hurt feelings weren't actionable, some of what they'd shared might cross lines. Jeremy had posted details about my job performance that he shouldn't have had access to. He must have been looking at confidential files. Allison had shared private information about my family that I'd told her in confidence, including details about my sister's medical history. David had posted screenshots of my text messages to him, including ones where I'd discussed my therapy sessions after my dad died. That felt like a violation of something, even if I couldn't name it exactly. I started a second document, categorizing messages by potential legal issues, policy violations, and simple betrayal. The third category was by far the longest. Thursday morning, I called in sick to work. I couldn't face Jeremy, not yet. Instead, I contacted a lawyer, not some random attorney, but Olivia Brennan, a woman who'd spoken at a veterans support group I'd attended. She specialized in harassment cases and had a reputation for being both brilliant and ruthless. I sent her an email outlining the situation and attaching a PDF of the organized screenshots. She responded within an hour, asking to meet that afternoon. When I walked into her office, she was already reviewing the documents on 2 monitors, making notes on a legal pad. She was maybe 45, with gray-streaked hair pulled back and the kind of sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Mr. Reeves," she said, shaking my hand, "I've reviewed your documentation. This is thorough work." She gestured to a chair. "Tell me what you want to accomplish here." I sat down, and for the first time since seeing that group chat, I felt some of the tightness in my chest ease, because she'd asked the right question. Not, "How do you feel?" or, "Are you sure you're not overreacting?" She wanted to know my objective. "I want them to understand they can't do this to people," I said. "I want consequences. Real ones." Olivia nodded, tapping her pen against the legal pad. "Several of these messages could constitute violations of employment policies, privacy breaches, or defamation. Your coworker Jeremy accessing and sharing confidential information about your job performance is a serious issue. The sharing of your private medical information and therapy details could potentially be actionable. But I need you to understand something, Nathan." She leaned forward. "Legal consequences are possible, but they're slow and uncertain. What often works better is strategic exposure, making sure the right people know what happened. Sometimes the court of public opinion moves faster than the actual courts. Are you prepared for that?" I thought about it for maybe 3 seconds. "Yes." She smiled, and it wasn't warm. It was the smile of someone who'd just accepted a challenge she knew she'd win. "Good. Then here's what we're going to do. First, we're going to document every policy violation in detail. I'm going to help you file a formal complaint with your HR department about Jeremy's conduct. Second, we're going to send cease and desist letters to the individuals who shared your private medical information, making it clear that further disclosure will result in legal action. Third," she paused, studying me. "Third, we're going to give them a chance to make this right. I'm going to draft a letter outlining what they did, the harm it caused, and what you require for resolution. If they respond appropriately, this can end quietly. If they don't, we escalate. Does that work for you?" It wasn't exactly the scorched earth approach part of me wanted, but it was smarter. "What would appropriate response look like?" I asked. Olivia started listing items on her fingers. "Written apologies acknowledging what they did. Agreement to cease all contact with you. For those who violated policies or laws, Jeremy, Allison, and potentially others, acceptance of professional and legal consequences, and a commitment to not retaliate or disparage you further." She looked at me directly. "The goal isn't just punishment, Nathan. It's ensuring this doesn't happen to you again, and ideally, preventing them from doing it to others. Some of these people showed patterns of behavior that suggest this isn't their first time orchestrating something like this." That hit me harder than I expected. The idea that they'd done this before, to someone else, and I was just the latest target. "How long will this take?" I asked. "The HR complaint. I can help you file tomorrow. The letters will go out by Monday. Then we wait for responses. 2 weeks, maybe 3, before we know how they're going to handle this." She closed her laptop and folded her hands. "In the meantime, I need you to do something difficult. Don't contact any of them. Don't respond to their messages. Don't defend yourself. Every interaction is an opportunity for them to twist the narrative or claim you're harassing them. Let the documentation speak for itself. Can you do that?" It went against every instinct I had. I wanted to confront them, to make them explain themselves, to hear them try to justify what they'd done. But I trusted Olivia, and I trusted the process. "I can do that," I said. She handed me her card. "Call me if any of them show up at your home or workplace. Call me if they post anything about you publicly. Call me if you find any additional evidence. Otherwise, I'll contact you when there's movement." I left her office feeling strange, not better exactly, but focused. I had a plan now, a strategy. I wasn't just sitting with the pain anymore. I was doing something about it. The next 48 hours were surreal. My phone kept buzzing with messages from various people in the group, each trying their own version of damage control. David sent a long text about how the chat was just a space to blow off steam, and I was making it into something it wasn't. Jeremy claimed he'd been defending me in the chat, and the screenshots were out of context. Allison said she was disappointed. I was violating their privacy by keeping screenshots. That one almost made me laugh. I was violating their privacy? I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I forwarded each message to Olivia, who added them to our growing file. "They're panicking," she noted when I sent her Allison's message. "That's good. Panic makes people sloppy." Friday afternoon, I filed the formal complaint with HR. The woman who took my report was named Patricia Odom, a veteran HR director who'd been with the company for 15 years. I'd brought printed copies of every message involving Jeremy, organized with timestamps and highlighted sections showing the policy violations. She spent 30 minutes reviewing them, her expression growing increasingly serious. "Mr. Reeves, I want to be clear with you about what happens next," she said. "I'm required to investigate this thoroughly. That means interviewing Jeremy and potentially other employees. It means reviewing access logs to determine if confidential information was improperly accessed. This will not be a quick process." She looked at me over her reading glasses. "And I need to warn you. This may become uncomfortable for you. Jeremy has friends in this company. There may be people who take his side." "I understand," I said. "But what he did was wrong. He accessed my personnel file without authorization and shared private information to mock me. That's not a gray area." Patricia nodded. "You're correct. It's not. And I want you to know that I take this seriously. We'll be conducting this investigation with full attention to company policy and legal requirements." She paused. "I'm also going to suggest you speak with Employee Assistance Program. Not because there's anything wrong with you, but because you're going through something difficult, and they can provide support." She handed me a card. "They're confidential, and they're good at what they do." I took the card, appreciating that she'd framed it as support, rather than questioning my stability. "Thank you," I said. "I'll reach out to them." That weekend, I did something I hadn't done in months. I reached out to people outside of that friend group. I called my sister Lindsay, who lived 3 states away. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Nathan," she finally said, her voice tight with anger. "I never liked those people. I know I never said anything, but every time I met them, something felt off. They were always just a little too performative, you know? Like they were playing parts." That observation settled into my chest with uncomfortable weight. "Why didn't you say anything?" I asked. "Because you seemed happy," she said softly, "and I thought maybe I was being overprotective. But God, Nathan, I'm so sorry. You deserved better than this." I also called my old Marine buddy, Keith Sullivan, who I'd served with overseas. Keith had moved to Montana and worked as a wilderness guide, and we usually only talked every few months. But when I explained what had happened, he got it immediately. "That's a minefield operation," he said, using our old terminology for situations where any step could blow up in your face. "You're doing the right thing, documenting everything and getting legal help. But Nathan, listen to me. You need to take care of yourself too. This kind of betrayal, it messes with your head. Don't try to tough it out alone." He gave me the name of a counselor who specialized in working with veterans, someone who understood the particular way we processed trust and betrayal. Dr. Michael Huang. He helped me when I got out and was dealing with some stuff. Give him a call. Monday morning, Olivia's cease and desist letters went out. I didn't hear about them directly, but I knew when they'd been delivered because my phone exploded with angry messages. David called me 12 times in 2 hours. When I didn't answer, he left a voicemail. "Are you seriously sending legal threats to your friends over some stupid messages? You're proving everything we said about you was right. You're dramatic, you're vindictive, and honestly, Nathan, you need professional help." I saved the voicemail and sent it to Olivia. Her response was succinct. "Perfect. He's establishing a pattern of harassment and gaslighting. This helps us." Allison sent an email to my personal address, a long, rambling message that oscillated between tearful apology and furious accusation. She claimed she'd been loyal to me during her stay at my apartment, that I was weaponizing her vulnerability, that the information she'd shared about my family was just conversation, and I was twisting it into something sinister. She ended with, "I thought you were better than this, but I guess I never really knew you at all." The irony of that last line wasn't lost on me. I forwarded the email to Olivia without comment. She replied an hour later. "She's attempting to establish herself as the victim. Don't take the bait. Her email actually helps us because it acknowledges she shared your private information, which is what we're addressing. Wednesday, I had my first session with Dr. Huang. His office was quiet and comfortable, and he had the kind of steady presence I associated with senior NCOs, people who'd seen enough to not be shocked by much. I gave him the abbreviated version of what had happened, and he listened carefully, occasionally making notes. When I finished, he asked a simple question. What bothers you most about this? The mockery, the deception, or the loss? I had to think about that. The deception, I said finally. I can handle people not liking me, but they pretended. For years they pretended, and I believed them. It makes me question everything. How did I not see it? What else am I not seeing? Dr. Huang nodded. That's a normal response to betrayal, especially for someone with your background. In military service, you learn to trust your unit with your life. That trust is sacred. When it's violated in civilian life, it triggers the same threat response. If you can't trust your assessment of people, how can you stay safe? He leaned forward slightly. But here's what I want you to understand, Nathan. This wasn't a failure of your judgment. They were actively working to deceive you. They had a whole system built around maintaining that deception. You couldn't have seen through it because they designed it specifically to be invisible to you. That perspective helped, but it didn't erase the doubt. How do I trust anyone again? I asked. How do I know the next friend group isn't doing the same thing? Doctor. Huang was quiet for a moment, considering. You don't, he said finally. That's the hard truth. You'll never have certainty about other people's intentions. What you can do is build better boundaries, pay attention to patterns of behavior rather than words, and trust yourself to handle whatever comes. You caught this, Nathan. You're handling it. That's evidence of your strength, not your weakness. We spent the rest of the session talking about concrete strategies for managing the anxiety and anger I was feeling. He gave me exercises for grounding myself when the rumination got too intense, and we scheduled weekly sessions for the next month. Thursday afternoon, Patricia from HR called me into her office. Her expression was grim. Mr. Reeves, I need to update you on the investigation. We've confirmed that Jeremy Foster accessed your personnel file without authorization on multiple occasions over the past 8 months. He used his supervisor credentials to view confidential performance reviews and salary information. We've also found evidence that he shared this information externally. She slid a document across the desk. This is the formal outcome. Jeremy is being terminated, effective immediately, for gross violation of company privacy policies and data security protocols. He's also being reported to the relevant regulatory authorities, as some of the information he accessed falls under protected classifications. I stared at the document, feeling a mixture of vindication and something emptier. What about the others? I asked. The people he shared the information with? Patricia's expression tightened. Those individuals are not our employees, so we have no jurisdiction over them. However, we're documenting everything in case there are future legal proceedings. Jeremy was escorted out of the building this morning. He's been banned from company property and stripped of all access credentials. She paused. I also want you to know, several other employees have come forward since your complaint. Apparently Jeremy had a history of this behavior. You weren't the first person he'd targeted, but you were the first to file a formal complaint with documentation. Because of your actions, we're implementing new privacy protocols and retraining for all managers with access to personnel files. That information hit me in a way I hadn't expected. Other people had been hurt by Jeremy's behavior, but they hadn't felt safe enough to report it. My complaint had opened a door for them to come forward. Can I know who they are? I asked. I can't share identifying information, Patricia said, but I can tell you that your willingness to stand up has made a real difference. Sometimes all it takes is one person refusing to accept the unacceptable. She stood and offered her hand. I know this has been difficult, Mr. Reeves. The company appreciates your professionalism in handling this matter. The following Monday, Olivia called with an update. We've received responses to the cease and desist letters. Some are better than others. David's attorney sent a boilerplate reply denying wrongdoing. Allison sent a personal response that's interesting. She sounded amused. She's offering a formal written apology and an agreement to have no further contact with you. But she's also claiming emotional distress from your legal intimidation. Her attorney is suggesting mediation. I felt my jaw tighten. Mediation? She shared my sister's medical information with 15 people as a joke, and she wants mediation? Olivia's voice was calm. What she wants and what she'll get are different things. Here's my recommendation. We accept the written apology and no contact agreement, and we ignore the mediation request. She's trying to create a narrative where she's also a victim. We don't engage with that. What about the others? I asked. Most have agreed to the no contact terms. A few are still consulting with attorneys. One, your former roommate David, is threatening to sue you for emotional distress and defamation. Olivia laughed, actually laughed. I almost hope he does. We have hundreds of messages showing a coordinated campaign of mockery and exclusion. He'd be laughed out of court, and it would give us the opportunity to make everything public record. But he won't. His attorney knows that. This is posturing. She paused. Nathan, I think we're approaching a turning point. Most of them are backing down. The ones who aren't are exposing themselves. How are you holding up? Honestly, I wasn't sure. Some days I felt strong, vindicated, in control. Other days I felt hollow, like I'd lost something I couldn't name. I'm managing, I told her. Good. Keep managing. This next part might get messy. She was right. Over the next week, I started hearing through secondary connections that some members of the group were spreading their own version of events. According to their narrative, I'd infiltrated their private chat, stolen their messages, and was now persecuting them for normal friend conversations. They claimed I was unstable, obsessed, potentially dangerous. A former coworker reached out to ask if I was doing okay, because she'd heard I was going through something. When I asked what she'd heard, she hesitated before admitting that Jeremy had posted on social media about being unfairly terminated by a vindictive colleague. That was a mistake on his part. A big one. Because his post violated the severance agreement he'd signed with the company, which included a non-disparagement clause. I forwarded the screenshot to Patricia, who forwarded it to the company's legal team. Jeremy's post was deleted within hours, and I later learned his severance package had been revoked. But the damage was done. The narrative was out there, and some people believed it. I lost a few casual friendships, people who knew both me and members of the group, and who decided it was easier to believe I was the problem than to confront the possibility that their other friends were cruel. Dr. Huang helped me process that loss. Not everyone is going to understand what happened, he said during one session. And some people will choose the easier story over the true one. That's human nature. It doesn't mean you were wrong to stand up for yourself. We talked about the concept of fundamental attribution error, the tendency to judge others by their worst actions while judging ourselves by our intentions. They're doing that in reverse, he explained, judging their friends by good intentions while judging you by what they perceive as malicious actions. The cognitive dissonance of accepting that their friends could be cruel is too much, so they reframe you as the villain. But not everyone bought the false narrative. My sister flew out to spend a weekend with me, and we spent hours just talking. She told me stories I'd forgotten, times when that friend group had made subtle digs at me in her presence, moments where she'd felt uncomfortable with how they treated me, but hadn't wanted to overstep. They were always just slightly condescending, she said, like they were tolerating you rather than enjoying your company. I thought I was reading too much into it, but I wasn't. Keith also checked in regularly, and through him I reconnected with a few other veterans from my unit. We started a monthly video call, and slowly I realized I was building a new circle, smaller, but built on actual trust and shared values. 6 weeks after the group chat incident, I received a package at my apartment. No return address, but postmarked from David City. Inside was a printed letter, 2 pages long, handwritten. My hand shook as I unfolded it, half expecting more accusations or threats. Instead, it was an apology. Not a legal one, not a carefully worded corporate statement, a real apology. David wrote that he'd been in therapy since this all started, and his therapist had helped him understand the magnitude of what he'd participated in. He acknowledged the scoring system, the coordinated exclusion, the cruelty of the group chat. He wrote, "I convinced myself we were just venting, that everyone does this, that it wasn't serious. But reading back through those messages now, with clear eyes, I'm horrified. We created a system specifically designed to mock you while keeping you close enough to mock. That's not friendship. That's abuse." He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't ask to resume the friendship. He just apologized, took responsibility, and explained that he was working on himself to understand why he'd participated in something so harmful. "You deserved better," he wrote at the end. "You deserved honesty. And I'm sorry I didn't have the courage to give you that until you forced the issue by standing up for yourself." I sat with that letter for a long time. Part of me wanted to dismiss it as too little, too late. Part of me appreciated the honesty, even if it couldn't undo the damage. I showed it to Dr. Huang in our next session. "What do you think it means?" he asked. I thought about that. "I think it means he's changing," I said. "I don't know if that helps me, but maybe it helps the next person he's friends with." The HR investigation expanded beyond Jeremy. Apparently, several people in the company had been part of secondary group chats, where confidential information was shared as entertainment. The company brought in an outside firm to audit their information security practices and implemented new protocols. I heard through Patricia that several managers had been disciplined, though she couldn't share details. The ripple effects of my complaint had exposed systemic problems with how the company handled private employee data. I felt a grim satisfaction knowing that something positive had come from this disaster. 3 months after the group chat incident, I received a call from someone I didn't know, a journalist named Rachel Brooks, who worked for a local news station. "Mr. Reeves, I'm working on a story about workplace privacy violations and digital harassment. Your case has been referenced in several industry publications about corporate data security. Would you be willing to speak with me about your experience?" I told her I'd need to consult with my attorney first. Olivia was enthusiastic. "This could be powerful," she said. "Telling your story publicly, on your own terms, would take away their ability to control the narrative. But it's entirely your choice. There's no legal obligation, and there are risks to going public. If this story keeps your interest, please subscribe to get more stories like this." I thought about it for a week, talked to Dr. Huang about it, talked to my sister and Keith. Finally, I decided to do it. Not because I wanted revenge, I was past that. But because Rachel was right, this was bigger than just my situation. The interview aired on a Thursday evening. Rachel had done her homework, talking to employment law experts, privacy advocates, and even getting comment from Patricia about the company's policy changes. She framed my story carefully, focusing on the broader issues of workplace harassment and digital privacy while respecting my privacy and dignity. I watched it at home with Lindsay, who'd flown back out to support me. The response was immediate and overwhelming. My phone started buzzing with messages from people I hadn't heard from in years. Old classmates, distant relatives, former colleagues. Most were supportive. Some shared their own stories of similar betrayals. A few were clearly fishing for gossip, trying to get me to name names or share more details. I ignored those. But what surprised me most were the messages from strangers, people who'd seen the interview and reached out to say it had helped them understand their own experiences, that seeing someone stand up against this kind of betrayal had given them courage to address their own situations. One message stood out. It was from a woman named Isabel Garcia, who worked in HR at a tech company. "I saw your interview," she wrote. "3 years ago, I discovered something similar, a group chat where my entire team mocked me. I didn't report it because I was afraid of retaliation, and I didn't think anyone would care. Your story made me realize I wasn't crazy for being hurt. I just wanted to thank you for speaking up." I wrote back, telling her she wasn't crazy, that her feelings were valid, and that I hoped she'd found better people since then. She responded that she had, and that seeing my interview had helped her forgive herself for not handling it better at the time. That exchange crystallized something for me. This wasn't just about my pain anymore. By going public, I'd created space for other people to acknowledge their own experiences of betrayal and exclusion. Dr. Huang had talked about finding meaning in trauma, not that the trauma was good or necessary, but that we could choose what we did with it afterward. I was choosing to use mine to help others feel less alone. It didn't erase what had happened to me, but it gave it purpose beyond just my personal vindication. 4 months after the group chat incident, the legal matters were settled. Most of the cease and desist agreements had been signed. Jeremy's termination was final, and he'd lost an employment lawsuit he'd foolishly filed against the company. Allison had sent a formal written apology and signed a no-contact agreement. David's letter remained in my desk drawer, a reminder that people could change even if relationships couldn't be salvaged. The others had mostly faded into silence, complying with the no-contact terms without additional drama. Olivia called to give me the final update. "It's over," she said. "Legally, you're clear. All agreements are in place. All violations have been addressed through appropriate channels. You did it, Nathan." But she was wrong about one thing. It wasn't over. Not entirely. Because the psychological impact of that kind of betrayal doesn't end when the legal paperwork is signed. I still had moments where I'd doubt my read on a situation, where I'd wonder if someone's friendliness was real or performed. I still sometimes woke up at 3 in the morning thinking about specific messages from that chat, particular jokes that had cut deep. Dr. Huang assured me this was normal, that healing wasn't linear, that I'd have setbacks even as I moved forward. "The goal isn't to forget or to stop feeling hurt," he said. "The goal is to integrate this experience into your life without letting it define you." I started rebuilding my social life slowly, carefully. I joined a veterans hiking group and met people who understood military culture and didn't need me to perform or translate my experiences. I took a woodworking class at the community center and discovered I enjoyed creating things with my hands, and the other students were friendly without being intrusive. I said yes to coffee with a woman named Sophie from the class, and we had 3 dates before mutually deciding we were better as friends. And then we actually stayed friends, which felt like proof that healthy relationships were possible. Cooper and I took longer walks, and I appreciated his simple, uncomplicated loyalty in a way I never had before. 6 months after the group chat incident, I was promoted at work. The position had opened when Jeremy was terminated, and after the investigation concluded, Patricia had recommended me for it. "You showed integrity and courage during a difficult situation," she told me when making the offer. "Those are qualities we value in leadership positions." The promotion came with a significant raise and, more importantly, a fresh start with a new team. My first day in the new role, one of my team members asked if I wanted to join their group chat for coordinating projects. I felt my stomach drop, that instant flash of panic. But then I noticed the chat was specifically labeled with project names and objectives. It was transparent, professional, purpose-driven, nothing like what I'd experienced before. I said yes, and it was fine. Just a normal work chat about deadlines and documents. No hidden meanings, no subtle mockery. That night, I told Dr. Huang about it in our session. "That must have been scary," he said. "It was," I admitted. "But I did it anyway, and it was okay." He smiled. "That's growth, Nathan. Not the absence of fear, but the willingness to take reasonable risks despite it." We'd started spacing out our sessions, bi-weekly now instead of weekly. I was managing better, sleeping better, trusting myself more. The anger had faded to something quieter, more like acceptance. What those people had done was wrong, but I'd survived it. More than survived. I'd stood up, fought back, and won. 1 year after the group chat incident, my sister convinced me to throw a party for my birthday. I'd avoided celebrating the previous year, not wanting to deal with the awkward questions about where my friends were. But this year felt different. I invited the veterans hiking group, my woodworking classmates, a few colleagues from my new team, Sophie and Keith, who flew in from Montana. 15 people total, by coincidence the same number who'd been in that secret chat. But these people were real. They knew me, actually knew me, and chose to be there anyway. No performance, no secret channels, just genuine connection. During the party, someone asked me how I was doing, really doing, with everything that happened last year. The room got quiet, everyone suddenly interested in their drinks. I appreciated that they cared enough to wonder, but were respectful enough not to pry. "I'm doing well," I said, and I meant it. What happened was terrible, but it taught me to value authentic relationships over comfortable ones. Every person in this room is here because we have genuine connection, and that's worth more than any number of fake friendships. Sophie raised her glass. "To real friends," she said. Everyone echoed her, and we moved on to easier topics. But later, Keith pulled me aside. "You handled that with a lot of grace," he said. "Old you would have made a joke and changed the subject." He was right. Old me would have. "I'm not trying to hide from it anymore," I told him. "It's part of my story now. Might as well own it." 18 months after the group chat incident, I testified before a state legislative committee about digital privacy and workplace harassment. Olivia had connected me with advocacy groups working on strengthening employee protections, and they'd asked if I'd share my experience to support proposed legislation. I was nervous. Public speaking had never been my strength, but I'd prepared carefully. I told them about discovering the chat, about the systematic coordination of exclusion, about how existing policies had failed to prevent the harm but had at least provided recourse afterward. I talked about the other victims who'd come forward after my complaint and how better protections could have prevented the harm entirely rather than just punishing it after the fact. The legislators asked thoughtful questions. One asked how I'd found the courage to come forward when I knew there might be professional and social consequences. I thought about that before answering. I realized that keeping silent was also a choice with consequences, I said. It meant accepting that this behavior was okay, that I deserved it, that nothing would change. I couldn't live with those consequences. Coming forward was scary, but at least it gave me agency. I was choosing to stand up rather than letting them choose my silence. The committee chair thanked me for my testimony, and several members approached me afterward to share their own experiences or those of family members. The legislation passed 3 months later. It wasn't solely because of my testimony, but I'd been part of the chorus of voices demanding change. 2 years after the group chat incident, I ran into David. Not planned, just random chance at a coffee shop. We both froze. He looked different, thinner, older somehow, tired around the eyes. I had a split second to decide how to handle this, and I chose civility. "David," I said, nodding. "Nathan," he replied. I didn't expect to see you here." We stood there awkwardly until I gestured to an empty table. "Do you want to talk? You don't have to. But if you want to, I'm willing." He nodded, looking relieved and terrified in equal measure. We sat down, and for a minute, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "I know my letter wasn't enough. I know an apology doesn't fix what I participated in. But I want you to know it was real. The therapy, the self-examination, all of it. I'm trying to be better." I believed him. Not because I was naive anymore, but because I'd learned to read people more carefully. His body language, his word choice, the fact that he didn't make excuses or ask for anything, it all felt genuine. "I appreciate that," I said. "And I hope you succeed. Not for me, but for you, and for the people in your life now." He nodded slowly. "I heard about your advocacy work, the legislation. That's really important. I'm glad something positive came from this whole mess." We talked for 20 minutes, carefully avoiding anything too deep, sticking to safe topics. When we stood to leave, he offered his hand. I shook it. Not because I forgave him entirely, but because I no longer needed to carry anger toward him. He was just a person who'd done harmful things, learned from them, and was trying to do better. That was enough. Walking home from that encounter, I felt lighter. Not because I'd reconciled with David, we'd never be friends again, and that was okay, but because I'd proven to myself that I could face the past without being consumed by it. I could acknowledge the harm while also acknowledging growth. I could hold space for complexity, that people could hurt me terribly and still deserve the chance to change, even if I wasn't obligated to stick around for their redemption arc. Dr. Huang had been right. Healing wasn't about forgetting, or even necessarily forgiving. It was about integrating the experience and moving forward with wisdom rather than bitterness. 3 years after the group chat incident, I delivered a keynote speech at a conference on workplace culture and digital ethics. The organizers had reached out after seeing my legislative testimony, and I'd agreed because the work felt important. I stood on that stage in front of 200 professionals and told my story, not as a victim seeking sympathy, but as someone who'd navigated betrayal and emerged with practical insights about preventing similar harm to others. I talked about the importance of documentation, about standing up even when it's uncomfortable, about the difference between conflict and abuse, about building systems that protect rather than punish. During the Q&A, someone asked if I regretted how I'd handled things. Not the reporting or the legal action, I said. But I wish I'd trusted my instincts earlier. There were signs I ignored because I wanted to believe in those friendships. If I could go back, I'd tell myself that your gut knows things your mind hasn't processed yet. Listen to it. Another person asked what I'd say to someone currently experiencing similar betrayal. I paused, thinking about all the messages I'd received over the past 3 years, all the stories people had shared. First, document everything. Second, tell someone you trust. Third, remember that their betrayal says nothing about your worth and everything about their character. And fourth, this is the hardest one. Give yourself permission to grieve the friendship you thought you had, because that loss is real, even if the friendship wasn't. After the conference, several attendees approached me. One was a young woman, maybe 25, who told me she'd discovered a similar group chat about her 6 months ago and hadn't known what to do. Your story helped me realize I wasn't overreacting, she said. I filed a complaint with my HR department last week. Another was a middle-aged man who'd experienced something similar in his friend group and had spent years thinking he was the problem. Hearing you speak about it, seeing that you got through it and built a better life, that gives me hope, he said. These conversations reminded me why I'd chosen to go public with my story, why I'd turned my pain into advocacy. That evening, back in my apartment, I looked at Cooper snoring on the couch and thought about how different my life was now compared to 3 years ago. I'd lost people I'd considered my best friends, but I'd gained genuine relationships built on honesty and mutual respect. I'd lost a job situation where I'd been comfortable but vulnerable, and gained a leadership position where I could protect others. I'd lost my naive trust in people, but gained the wisdom to build healthier boundaries. The trade-offs weren't equal. What I'd lost had value, and the pain of that loss was real. But what I'd gained was sustainable in a way those fake friendships never were. I opened my laptop and started drafting an article about my experience for a psychology journal that had approached me. The editor wanted a first-person perspective on betrayal trauma and recovery to accompany academic articles on the same topic. As I wrote, I realized how much of the story I could now tell without the sharp edges of fresh pain. It had become integrated into my narrative, a chapter that informed who I was without defining me entirely. I wrote about the group chat, the discovery, the legal process, the recovery. But I also wrote about the lessons, about the difference between privacy and secrecy, about how systems of harm require coordination and silence, about the courage it takes to trust again after betrayal. The article was published 3 months later, and the response was overwhelming. The journal received more reader responses to my piece than any other that year. People shared it widely, and I received dozens of messages from readers who'd experienced similar situations. Some were in the middle of their own crisis, seeking advice. Others had survived and wanted to share their own stories. A few were people who'd participated in group chats like the one that had targeted me, who read my article and realized the harm they'd caused. Those messages were complicated to read. Part of me appreciated their recognition. Part of me wondered why it had taken reading a stranger's pain for them to understand. 4 years after the group chat incident, I started dating someone seriously for the first time since everything had happened. Her name was Elena, and we'd met through the Veterans Hiking Group. She was a former Navy officer who worked as a data analyst. What I appreciated most about Elena was her directness. When I told her about the group chat situation early in our relationship, she didn't offer platitudes or try to minimize it. She just asked questions, listened carefully, and then said, "That must have fundamentally changed how you approach relationships. I'm glad you're willing to try anyway." We took things slow, building trust gradually, and I appreciated that she understood why I needed that pace. Elena met Lindsay and Keith, and they approved. "She's good for you," my sister told me after a weekend visit where we'd all hiked together. "She doesn't need you to perform, and she doesn't let you hide either. That's the balance you need." She was right. Elena challenged me when I started falling into old patterns of people-pleasing or overextending myself to prove my worth. But she also celebrated my wins and supported me through the occasional setback. 6 months into our relationship, I realized I trusted her completely, not blindly, not naively, but with the earned trust that comes from consistent behavior over time. 5 years after the group chat incident, I was invited to speak at a university about digital citizenship and ethical friendship. The students asked sharp questions about cancel culture, about the line between accountability and vindictiveness, about whether forgiveness was required for healing. I appreciated their thoughtfulness. Accountability isn't the same as cancellation, I explained. Accountability says, you did harm, and there are consequences. It creates opportunities for change. Cancellation says, you're irredeemable and deserve destruction. One is about justice and growth, the other is about punishment and exclusion. I talked about David's letter, about our coffee shop encounter, about how holding people accountable could coexist with allowing them space to change. One student asked if I'd ever contacted any of the other members of that original group to see how they'd changed. I shook my head. "That's not my responsibility," I said. "I hope they learned from it. I hope they're better friends to the people in their lives now. But my healing didn't require their transformation, and my peace doesn't depend on their growth. I focus on my own journey and let them handle theirs." That boundary felt important to maintain. I could tell my story advocate for change, and even acknowledged that people could grow without needing to be the witness or facilitator of their personal development. After the talk, a young man approached me privately. "I was in a group chat like that," he admitted quietly. "We mocked one of our friends. It started as jokes, but it got mean. After hearing you speak, I realize how much damage we probably did. I don't know how to fix it." I appreciated his honesty. "Start by stopping," I said. "Leave the chat if it still exists. Examine why you participated. What need was it filling for you? Work on yourself so you don't recreate that dynamic in future friendships. And if you have the courage, apologize to the person you hurt. Not for your benefit, but for theirs. Let them know they weren't crazy for feeling hurt." He nodded, looking shaken but determined. "Thank you," he said. "I needed to hear this." 6 years after the group chat incident, the legislation I'd testified for was showing measurable results. The advocacy group that had coordinated my testimony published a report showing that workplace complaints about digital harassment had increased by 35% in our state, not because harassment had increased, but because people felt safer reporting it. The new protections had teeth, and companies were taking privacy violations more seriously. I felt a deep satisfaction knowing that my worst experience had contributed to protecting others. It didn't erase what had happened to me, but it gave it meaning beyond personal pain. I'd also started mentoring people going through similar situations, connected through the advocacy organization. I'd meet with them, review their documentation, help them understand their options, and most importantly, remind them that they weren't crazy or oversensitive. One woman I mentored, Jasmine, had discovered her entire book club had a separate chat where they mocked her contributions and joked about her personal life. She was devastated, questioning everything about herself. I walked her through the same process Olivia had walked me through: documentation, legal consultation, strategic response. 6 months later, she'd severed ties with that group, filed a complaint about privacy violations with her employer, several book club members were co-workers, and started rebuilding with healthier friendships. "You gave me permission to be angry," she told me. "Everyone else was telling me to just let it go, that it wasn't that serious. But you understood that it was serious, and that anger was appropriate." 7 years after the group chat incident, Elena and I got married. The ceremony was small, just close friends and family, the people who'd proven their loyalty and care over years. During my vows, I talked about how she'd taught me that trust could be rebuilt, that not all vulnerability leads to betrayal, that healthy relationships were possible. "You saw me at my most guarded," I said, "and you had the patience to wait while I learned to open up again. Thank you for that gift." The reception was filled with laughter and genuine warmth, and I realized I'd created exactly the life I needed, smaller than what I'd had before, but infinitely more real. Keith gave a toast that made me laugh and cry simultaneously. "Nathan and I served together in some pretty tough situations," he said. "I watched him stay calm under fire, make impossible decisions under pressure, and always have his unit's back. But the bravest thing I've seen him do was stand up when his so-called friends betrayed him and then choose to trust again afterward. That takes more courage than combat ever required." He raised his glass. "To Nathan and Elena, may your marriage be built on the kind of trust that weathers anything." The room erupted in cheers, and I felt overwhelmingly grateful for the community I'd built from the ashes of that old friend group. 8 years after the group chat incident, I received an unexpected message. It was from Jeremy, my former co-worker who'd been fired for accessing my personnel file. The message was brief. "I know I have no right to contact you. I'm in recovery and working on making amends for harm I've caused. I'm not asking for forgiveness or reconciliation. I just want you to know I understand what I did was wrong, and I'm sorry. I hope you're doing well." I stared at the message for a long time, feeling a complicated mix of emotions. Part of me was angry that he'd contacted me at all after years of silence. Part of me appreciated the straightforward apology without expectations. I showed it to Dr. Huang, who I still saw quarterly for maintenance sessions. "What do you want to do with this?" he asked. "I don't know," I admitted. "I don't forgive him. What he did wasn't just unprofessional, it was cruel. But I also don't need him to suffer forever." Dr. Huang nodded. "Forgiveness isn't required for healing. You can acknowledge his apology, appreciate that he's working on himself, and still maintain your boundary. Those things can coexist." I decided to respond briefly. "I acknowledge your apology. I hope your recovery continues successfully. Please don't contact me again." Short, civil, final. He responded with a simple, "Understood. Thank you." And that was the end of it. I didn't ruminate on it, didn't let it disrupt my peace. It was just one more piece of the past being put properly in its place. 9 years after the group chat incident, I published a book. It was part memoir, part practical guide for people navigating betrayal and recovery. I'd worked on it for 3 years, wanting to get it right, to tell my story honestly while also providing actionable advice for readers going through similar situations. The book included interviews with other survivors, insights from therapists and legal experts, and a framework for understanding different types of social betrayal. It wasn't a bestseller, but it found its audience. I received messages from readers across the country telling me how it had helped them make sense of their own experiences, given them language for what they'd endured, or inspired them to take action they'd been afraid to take. One review stuck with me. It was from a therapist who specialized in trauma. Reeves has done something remarkable here. He's taken his personal pain and transformed it into a roadmap for others, without minimizing the difficulty of the journey or offering false promises of easy healing. This is essential reading for anyone who's discovered that the people they trusted were not who they claimed to be. That validation meant everything. Confirmation that the years of work, therapy, advocacy, and painful self-reflection had produced something valuable beyond my own healing. 10 years after the group chat incident, I stood in front of a mirror and barely recognized the person looking back. Not physically. I'd aged, sure, a few more gray hairs, lines around my eyes. But emotionally, psychologically, I was fundamentally different. The naive trust was gone, replaced by earned wisdom. The desperate need to be liked had transformed into comfort with being respected and understood by people who actually knew me. The performance of friendship had given way to authentic connection. I thought about the Nathan who'd opened that group chat 10 years ago, stomach dropping as he realized his friends were strangers. I felt compassion for him, for how much pain he'd had to endure, how much work lay ahead of him. But I also felt pride. He'd survived. More than that, he'd thrived. That evening, Elna and I hosted a dinner party. The guests were my sister and her family, Keith and his partner, Sophie and her wife, a few colleagues from work, some people from our hiking group, and Jasmine, the woman I'd mentored who'd become a close friend. 15 people total. I noticed the number as everyone settled in, and I smiled at the symmetry. 10 years ago, 15 people had gathered in secret to mock me. Tonight, 15 people gathered openly to celebrate genuine friendship. The difference wasn't just in their intentions, it was in who I'd become. I'd learned to build relationships on honesty rather than pretense, to value quality over quantity, to trust carefully but fully when that trust was earned. After dinner, Lindsay pulled me aside. "You seem really happy," she said. "Like, genuinely at peace. I don't think I've seen you like this since... maybe ever?" I thought about that. "I am at peace," I said. "Not because I've forgotten what happened or because it doesn't matter, but because I've integrated it. It's part of my story, but it's not the whole story. And the chapters I've written since then are pretty damn good." She hugged me tight. "I'm proud of you, little brother. You could have let that experience make you bitter and closed off. Instead, you used it to become more discerning, more genuine, more you." That night, lying next to Elena while she slept, I thought about the question I'd asked Dr. Huang all those years ago. How do you trust again after betrayal? I finally had my answer. You don't trust blindly, you trust wisely. You pay attention to patterns, not promises. You build relationships gradually, with people who show up consistently. You set boundaries and honor them. You choose vulnerability with people who've earned it, not everyone who asks for it. You remember that trust is a gift you give carefully, not a commodity you distribute freely. And when you do trust, you trust fully, because the alternative, living in constant fear of betrayal, isn't really living at all. The group chat that was supposed to destroy me had instead rebuilt me. Not better necessarily, but different. More resilient, more authentic, more intentional about every relationship I maintained. The people who'd mocked me in secret had inadvertently taught me the value of those who celebrated me openly. Their cruelty had shown me the importance of kindness. Their deception had taught me to value transparency. Their coordinated exclusion had helped me appreciate genuine inclusion. 10 years later, I could finally say, I didn't deserve what they did to me, but I earned everything I built after it. And that, more than any revenge or apology or legal victory, was the justice I'd needed all along. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.